They packed Madison Square Garden to hear a hero speak. But no one, not the cheering crowd, not the press, not even Henry Wallace himself knew that this speech would end his entire political life. In less than 20 minutes, America's former vice president would publicly challenge President Truman, question the nation's direction, and set off a political explosion so powerful, it would erase him from Washington almost overnight. And the most shocking part, Wallace believed he was saving America. Truman believed he was endangering it. This is the story of the speech that ended a career, and quietly pushed America deeper into the Cold War. The lights of Madison Square Garden burned hot above the crowd, filling the hall with a restless energy. Henry Wallace stepped onto the stage wearing a modest suit, looking nothing like the fiery reformer he once was. But when he approached the microphone, something changed. His shoulders straightened, his eyes sharpened. A man who felt forgotten suddenly found a voice again. Wallace had been sidelined ever since Harry Truman took office. Once Franklin Roosevelt, as trusted vice president, admired across the nation, he now lived in the shadow of a new presidency, watching policies drift toward confrontation with the Soviet Union. And tonight, he was done staying silent. He began with calm words, speaking of peace, cooperation, and the dangers of fear-driven politics. The audience nodded, applauded, encouraged him. But then, he crossed a line. Wallace accused the Truman administration of turning its back on Roosevelt's vision. He warned that America was marching toward unnecessary tension, a world divided by suspicion instead of hope. People in the front rows looked at each other. The energy shifted. This wasn't just a speech anymore. It was a challenge. A rehook moment rippled through the crowd. Was the former vice president accusing the president of endangering the country? Yes, he was. And in that single moment, the script of American politics began to crack. As Wallace continued, his tone hardened. He spoke not as a polite critic, but as a man issuing a warning to the nation. He argued that America should cooperate with the Soviet Union, not challenge it. That the Truman administration, as aggressive stance, was pushing the world toward a conflict that could eclipse even World War II. Gasps spread through the arena. Some cheered louder, believing Wallace was resurrecting Roosevelt's dream of global unity. But others sat frozen, realizing he was openly attacking US foreign policy during a moment when the world was already trembling with uncertainty. Wallace pushed further, declaring that America should not meet force with force, but with understanding. He insisted the U.S. had a moral obligation to avoid provoking the Soviets. In 1946, when global fears were rising and military tensions sharpening, these words sounded almost dangerous. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling frantically. Political operatives in the audience exchanged looks of disbelief. A former vice president had just implied that Truman's strategy risked destabilizing the entire world. This wasn't a policy disagreement anymore. It was public defiance, and everyone wondered the same thing. Did Wallace just accuse the president of steering America toward war? That single question sparked a quiet storm, one that would reach the Oval Office before sunrise. By the next morning, Wallace's words were everywhere, splashed across newspapers, whispered in government hallways, dissected in military offices. But the reaction wasn't mixed this time. It was nearly unanimous, and it was furious. To many in Washington, Wallace hadn't just criticized Truman, he had handed the Soviets a propaganda victory on a silver platter. Officials claimed his speech made America look divided at the very moment it needed unity the most. Diplomats warned that foreign governments were already questioning whether Truman truly spoke for the nation, and the military, still watching the Soviet Union expand its influence, believed Wallace had jeopardized national strategy with a single microphone. Behind closed doors, Truman's advisors were blunt. Mr. President, he undermined you. If you don't act, the world will think he speaks for America. The pressure grew by the hour. Newspapers accused Wallace of naivete. Senators called him reckless. Some even said his speech bordered on disloyalty, not because he loved the Soviets, but because he underestimated the very real danger they posed. And as the storm intensified, a chilling realization swept Washington. Wallace wasn't just out of step with Truman's policy. He was attacking the foundation of America's emerging post-war strategy. Truman knew what that meant. Wallace couldn't stay in the administration. Not after this. Not after Madison Square Garden. All that remained was to decide how and when to act, and the world didn't have to wait long. On September 20, 1946, just 3 days after the Madison Square Garden speech, President Truman made his move. The decision had been circling him like a storm cloud, but now it was unavoidable. Wallace walked into the Oval Office expecting debate, maybe even reconciliation. Instead, he walked into the sentence that would define the rest of his political life. Truman was calm, almost sorrowful, but firm. "I'm asking for your resignation." For a few seconds, Wallace just stood there. This was the man who once sat one heartbeat from the presidency, a national hero of the New Deal, a champion of farmers, workers, and reformers. And now he was being dismissed, not for corruption, not for scandal, but for a speech he believed was a plea for global peace. But Truman couldn't afford sentiment. The Cold War was tightening its grip on the world, and America needed one unified voice. Wallace had chosen defiance, and the price was exile. The announcement hit the country like a shockwave. Supporters called it a betrayal. Critics said it was overdue. Newspapers across the nation ran the same headline in different words: Wallace fired, administration divided, Cold War lines hardened. And just like that, one of the most influential men of the 1930s and early 40s became politically radioactive. Washington insiders avoided him. Party leaders shut their doors. Invitations dried up overnight. Henry Wallace, former Vice President of the United States, didn't just lose his job, he was erased from the center of American power. Yet as he stepped out of the spotlight, he had no idea that history would remember this moment, not as a misstep, but as the speech that ended one career and defined an era. If you've watched this far, then you already understand something most people never notice. History doesn't change quietly. It shifts because of moments like this: one speech, one decision, one man being pushed out of Washington. And the course of the Cold War bends forever. If you want more powerful stories like this, the stories that textbooks skip, the stories that shape the world in silence, then you're in the right place. Like the video if this chapter of history opened your eyes. Subscribe to World War Ashes to keep these forgotten moments alive. And tell me in the comments, was Wallace brave or reckless? Your voice makes this channel stronger. Thank you for watching, and welcome to the journey through the ashes of history.